Andrade died in 2011, somewhere in the Indian Ocean. When his body was sent back to his home in the Philippines, it was covered in cuts and bruises. It was missing an eye, and it was jet black from having been stored in the fishing freezer on the vessel that he was working on. Errol became very sick when he was working on the fishing boat. The men on his crew were given rotten and expired food. They were only given about 200 mils of water a day each. The men worked 7 days a week, 20 hours a day. 7 days a week, 20 hours a day for close to a year. These conditions made Errol very sick. He was beaten severely by the captain of the fishing vessel one day because he could no longer work. He died of an apparent heart attack that night. 8 years have passed. There's never been an investigation into Errol's death or to the hyper-exploitative fishing conditions on that vessel. Errol's story illustrates what is arguably one of the most urgent but neglected human rights issues of our time, namely the trafficking of fishermen into the global seafood industry, what is often dubbed seafood slavery. The US State Department estimates that there are upwards of 160,000 men and boys trafficked onto Taiwanese vessels at any one time. If we were to include the Chinese, South Korean, Russian and Thai fishing fleets, which have been subject to similar claims of human trafficking, we would be talking of upwards of 750,000 men and boys trapped at sea beyond the legal jurisdiction and authority of any intervening agency. To put that in perspective, that's the combined populations of Darwin, Hobart and Canberra. My research addresses this issue, particularly by looking at gaps in the protection of fishermen, in the prevention of trafficking, and in facilitating and realising justice for the fishermen themselves. It involves two key things. First of all, in-depth interviews with the fishermen themselves. So far, I've conducted around 25. The research needs at least 100 more, from fishermen in different nationalities and working on different fishing fleets. It's important to note that there's been less than a dozen academic studies on this issue, and none of them have involved research that includes fishermen's voices themselves. Errol's story we know, but there are thousands that we don't know. Second, the research will gather the perspectives of key stakeholders working on this issue: government, NGOs, and seafarers missionaries, to look at the key gaps that they identify in their work. What is making it difficult for them to realise justice and to protect these fishermen? The impact of this study I see as being realised when some of these institutions and organisations take up my recommendations. So that could be organisations like United Nations Gapfish Program, or the Australian Government's Trafficking in Persons project based in Bangkok, or some large international NGOs like Slave Free Seas. I have contacts with all these organisations. They will not only facilitate access to participants for the research, but they will also be able to help disseminate the recommendations and the findings. Errol and his crewmates never received any salary the entire time that they were working on their fishing vessel. Errol's family has never received any restitution or compensation for his death. In order to change this situation, we really need research that includes the perspectives and the experiences of the fishermen themselves, Otherwise, many of the interventions will not work. Thank you.